Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. For my slide presentation today, it's not really going to be a slide presentation. I want to mix it up a little bit and talk a little bit about things that have been developing in my practice as a painter. Because I do two kinds of work. I paint as a public artist and I paint as a studio artist. The two have been somewhat different, and what's happened this year in these two things that I'm going to show you, they've come together in a very positive way. When I work in public work, as the example I'm going to show you is this children's courthouse that we installed last week. We spent 2 weeks installing. You will see that they're very large pieces, and to present the idea to a board, to get them approved and funded, I usually make small maquettes on wooden panels with collage and paint. And I present this to the committee and they say yes, and then I start working large. In my practice for my studio work, which in galleries I show my paintings, I usually don't work for maquettes. I start directly on a canvas. I draw on the canvas, I draw on rice paper, and I paint directly, and felt that that was really important difference between the public work and the private work. Well, as of this year, I was so taken by how the public work was flowing out of me. It was happening really quickly, and I felt that there was more creativity in this work that was being commissioned, because working small, I could really make big changes and be more playful. I could cut out an arm and put it next to a flower, or a wheel next to a boat, and I could be more playful. And so part of this project was to be playful because it was for children. And so I thought it was very important that there be a liveliness. I went to the courthouse in Florida, in Miami, to see what was going on in this place and what art had to do with it. I think that's part of the challenge as a public artist, is what is the psychology of a building and what's art's place. And so when I went there, it wasn't very pretty. The building was dirty. There were ripped up posters. There were a lot of haggard-looking social workers and lawyers trying to help kids that were really in trouble. There were two kinds of trouble they were in. There was family trouble, and there was legal or disciplinary trouble, so bad kids and kids in bad families. And I listened to some cases, and they were pretty severe. So I went back to the studio and I thought about it. I thought about what it was that I could add to this situation as an artist. And I thought the best thing to do was to open the window, really bring in color, bring life, bring nature, bring things that might welcome children, so that even though they were going through very stressful situations, they might feel a little more welcome in these cold buildings. The architect had come up with a very technical, almost airport-like building. So if we can show the first slide. So this is the entryway, and the three first floors that you see as you go through the metal detector are the walls that I was given to decorate. And as you can see, it's all metal, glass. It's a 3-story atrium with lots of light pouring over into it, but luckily there's an overhang, so there's no direct sunlight on the artwork. Originally, I had proposed that the artwork go in the courtroom where there was a wall behind the judge, and so it kind of was more internalized. And they had to prove that. Then one judge really hated the idea and nixed it and threw my art into the hallway. The hallway that they had thrown me into was the 5th, 6th, and 7th floor, which was very close to a window wall, and I was afraid that the work would be damaged. And so I brought it up in a meeting. So part of the process of being a public artist is to be able to negotiate and work with groups of people who aren't completely sensitive to art. Architects, as much as they would like to be, often think of art as an add-on to their beautiful building that they don't really want to alter that much. So there was a little bit of a negotiation going on, and I didn't want these paintings in just a hallway where people would walk by. Somebody in Art in Public Places pulled for me and presented me these 3 walls and said, would this work better? And I said yes. I was actually very thrilled with the idea that you could see the 3 floors as you came in, and it would be an architectural dialogue between the paintings and the building, and so the idea of welcoming became even more pronounced. The subject matter I decided on was, from my research and traveling to the Everglades, to make birds and fauna and plants that actually exist in the Everglades. And there will be a plaque to describe the subject matter so parents could talk to their kids about what they see, and social workers who go there repeatedly would start seeing things that they know from nature and from their locale in South Florida. Okay. So we started upstairs on the 3rd floor. It's a sheetrock wall, but we had plywood behind it so that it could hold a lot of weight. The paintings are done on wood in 7 panels. This is Mark Tambella, my assistant. And this is a system that he found in Canada that is basically a bar that has a little indentation that comes out, and we put hardware in the back of the paintings that slip into it. And my fear was that it would just look like pieces of plywood. Luckily, the Tambella, who's helping me install this, works many years helping me install public work, and was really able to get a very nice flat fit on the wall. Okay. So there you can see it from the 1st floor. That's bromeliad and a fig leaf, longleaf, which is a local Everglade plant. I really pumped up the colors, and one of the things that happened when I walked into the actual site and started to prepare it, I changed the position of certain paintings because of the vantage point. This painting originally was supposed to be on the 1st floor, but because its orientation is near the top, it worked much better there. So part of it is still like process. I mean, as much planning as we did, 7 years in the making, when I got there, I started changing things. And I think that's my prerogative as an artist, as I learned from studio work, that, you know, you can have everything planned, but if the artwork demands or asks for something different, you have to, you have to change your mind and work with that. Okay. So this is the full 7 panels, and the whole thing is on wood. Like I said, it's rice paper with different water-based urethanes. A lot of the color comes from underneath the paper, so it's almost like monoprinting. I do big areas of color that are very saturated, and then when the paper goes over it, it softens the color, and there's a green tone to the paper. And these are local flowers, and then some of them are made up. I mean, I think that's part of the fun of it. If you want there to be fun in a work of art, it can't be so strict that you can't decide to change things. So this is the 2nd floor. These are bladderwort, is the name of the flower that looks like an iris. And then there's water lilies, and they're very abundant in the Everglades. And this is a little more Disney-like in that the colors are very cartoony, but it's also playful in terms of space. Some of the architects and kind of guys that were working as engineers and electricians there came up and said, well, why does the color change right here? Shouldn't it just continue if it's really water? And I said, well, it's actually a painting about water. And I have the liberty to change the color because I wanted to have a more ambiguous space. And they go, okay. But usually I don't explain myself. And I think the atmosphere that this creates from a distance, if we go to the next one, maybe we'll see more, is there. It really is amazing to me. I kept saying, this is like we're in the Rockefeller's house, and for kids, they're going to have these big, beautiful paintings when they come in to say, welcome, you're okay, you're going to be safe. Don't be afraid. Okay. So there's the second one completely in. And the stripes come from Seminole and Miccosukee Indians work a lot with geometry. And the whole inspiration for the series was the seal of the state of Florida. I took that as the subject matter. And if you find the seal of the state of Florida, you will see there is fauna and birds, and there's a sunrise with a Native American woman holding a basket of flowers. And there's pattern work in her costume. And so all those things were things that I referred to in the work. And this is the final one. The blackbird on the right is an anhinga, which have a very funny feather type of types of feathers that don't have a lot of oil in them, and because of that they have to dry themselves in the sun. And so if you see them out in the wild, they will be out there with their wings like this, and it's almost a menacing kind of position, but if you know them, it isn't. So there's a kind of a mark of fun, but at the same time a little bit of mystery. I mean, I want some things to happen in here that aren't completely explained. And again, the stripe patterns come from the same idea of the costumes. But it was very funny. One of the architect's assistants came up, and I said, well, what do you think of the painting? He says, well, I don't know why you put the Cuban flag in an American courthouse. And I said, that's not the Cuban flag. And he says, well, it looks like a Cuban flag. And I said, well, that's your imagination. That's banding, and banding as a way to contrast the nature and the softness of my brushwork with a kind of harder edge geometry is a way to get your attention. It's very crisp, and that's part of the dialogue or language I use in my work. Okay. So this is all three. I'm sorry that the bottom one had been covered already, but it just gives you a sense of the banding working from 3 floors and the kind of pastoral middle as a different kind of movement in this kind of 3-part artwork. I see it as a suite now, even though there is a 4th one that you can't see. It's on the 5th floor, in the community room floor. And this is the 5th floor with the 4th panel. And this has a ghost bird I put in there. That gray blackbird in the middle is kind of ghost-like. And if you really study that jumble of paint marks on the right, it's nothing. I mean, it's just me kind of having fun with the idea of exuberance and geometry and water and light. I spent 2 weeks down there, and I was living on the water when I was there, and it is a really unique situation they have in terms of light and color. It's very different than what we have here. And I wanted to make sure to incorporate that in my work. Okay, so that's that. This is the beginning of the end of this very long-term project, and I had worked using this process of making maquettes. And so I decided that in my studio I would start making small abstract maquettes from my collages. And for the last year I've been cutting up art forum magazines, mostly the ads, because they have very beautiful color and texture, and making abstract paintings from those maquettes. And that's kind of a fusion of practice for me. And in the spring I was invited to the La Mama Galleria in Lower Manhattan on 1st Street to do an exhibition. The La Mama Galleria was the first place that I worked in New York. La Mama, if you don't know, was this black lady who created a whole theater scene downtown on a nickel. And she ended up with all this real estate. And she asked me if I would paint in her garage because she wanted to make a gallery out of it. 30 years later, it's still there. It's still in the neighborhood. That's actually not in the exact same space, but I was one of the last shows in the space. So I said I would do an exhibition, but I wanted to be able to go back and work in the space as I did in the beginning, when 1981, when I was 29 years old, and to somehow reconnect with my own history. And the idea was to create something like an interaction with the space and with the people who came into the gallery and with artists, community. So I think that's enough of a setup for this. I made a movie along with my assistant, Nicholas Morgan, who's not here, he's in New York working, but he helped me a lot with the paintings that went to the courthouse and also with this film, editing and creating an original soundtrack. So the music is Nick Morgan. It was my concept, my direction, and we'll talk about it after. Hope it spurs some questions.
It was 81 when we were here, right?
Yes.
So how does it feel to come back where you really started making your first big, you were doing dices and you were doing bows at the time, I remember.
Big bows.
Yes.
It's not that far from a bow.
It's not so far. It's not so far.
Yeah,
yes.
It's kind of like...
Yeah, even that.
Yeah.
Even that, yes.
So, how does it feel? It feels good. I'm glad you're here because you were the original neighbor. And it was like the weirdest TV show because, you know, you were there living in a pretty bare, raw space. And I remember you had a stove and a sink maybe, and maybe not a sink. We had a hose.
No, we didn't have sink. It was no electricity, no water, no bathroom. And the telephone was in a trash plastic bag.
Because of the dust.
And we had like cardboard on the floor because you remember the floor, we didn't know.
I'm intrigued by the way you're working at the moment, finding those maquettes and working up to these big tableaux. And I'm often intrigued in your work by the sense of scale. I'm looking at this painting here, for instance, and it's evoking a sense of big scale mountains, sky. At the same time, it's a sort of micro scale, leaves, plants, and I'm wondering also about light. It's very effulgent. It's kind of full of a spontaneous kind of light within itself. How much do you think about the scale of association when you're working on this kind of scale?
It's a good question because I think scale is a really important part of what I'm doing now because of starting small and getting bigger with the image that might work small, but something else happens when it gets big. In this particular case, this painting came before I started working like this. This is a very spontaneous kind of scumbling my way into a shape, and there is a kind of buoyancy, or like you said, there's kind of a liveliness to it. And that relate to the bigger shapes in the newer work. So I think I was grasping for a bigger shape because as a painter you can paint and paint into things and they get smaller and smaller and it can get very exciting, but to hold on to a shape and to think that a form has enough substance that it could hold a canvas.
Do you feel more comfortable painting like with people being able to see, or do you prefer like your own personal space for painting?
I prefer to be alone in my own personal space, but this is an experiment for myself to see how I can, you know, push the boundaries of my comfortable area and also to have conversations with people that wouldn't usually be in my studio. Okay, that was great.
All right, let me ask you a question. I'm looking at the smaller works and I'm saying, wow, this is collage.
Yes.
And at what point did you start using collage? I mean, I never thought of you as a collagist or artist that, and so how does that play into your work? That would be my question right off the bat.
Okay, collage started to be part of my maquette developing procedures in public work. I made very, very large paintings that I had to present to committees, and I would make these little collages of what I would paint, very large. And I just finished 4 very large paintings, and so the facility of how easy it was to move things around and be creative and playful in a way that I couldn't on a large painting made me want to try it for my studio work. And this is fairly recent. So Nick, what are you doing?
I'm stretching the canvas.
Why?
So we can re-stretch it and make another painting.
2 more paintings before the show's over. Is that what we're going for? Can you show us what was on the canvas you're unstretching? Actually, that wasn't a show here last year at the Christmas show. Okay. here we go.
Hi, I'm Christine. I just came to your gallery and I really love your show. A question, you've been doing this for the past 30 years. Were you part of the graffiti movement at all?
There was graffiti going on. When I first started here, Keith Haring was tagging on the streets, and Jean-Michel Basquiat was working in the neighborhood, and Fab Five Freddy, and the rapping was happening down the street. So I enjoyed it. It was part of it like that. But in terms of my work came more from like pre-Columbian and non-Western art. As a student, I traveled a lot to Mexico, and I looked at a lot of kind of Mayan-inspired and Mayan art. And also Frida Kahlo, things like that.
She's my favorite.
Yeah.
She's my favorite.
As someone who's admired your color and your interesting use of strange textures over the decades, I'm curious what your relationship is to these vibrant colors and what happened to the coffee and stuff that you at one point were mixing into your paint.
Do you have a favorite painting here, and why?
My favorite is this. It's called Tablet, and it's my favorite because there are all the things that I love about painting, and it's like a new painting of mine, but it's very much like an old painting of mine. I see things in it that I would have enjoyed as a child, but I still enjoy as a grown man. So this is it.
Well, in Spanish, I think I can tell it better. Me gustan las pinturas de Roberto Juarez porque es inquietante el color, las formas. Me gustan las escalas con las que trabaja en estos grandes formatos. Y tiene, no sé, alegría, movimiento. Me gusta, es interesante.
So beautiful and powerful, this painting. And it's got a lot of figurative qualities to it that are implied. The clouds and the wheel or the clock in the trees and I love this painting so much, and it has a sense of a road race.
But I'm of your idea, your urge to blow things up to a gigantic size. What the satisfaction is in that? What the or some of the frustrations? What are the, but does it change the thing completely? That sort of thing.
Or my impulse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you have to hold. I like big because I like architecture. I think I have a romance with architecture for my whole life. I think it comes from growing up in Chicago where there are great buildings, and the idea that architecture and painting could be together is not something I'm making up. It's historic. I mean, in Mexican art and in Roman art and Pompeii. But that idea that building and painting together is the most wonderful thing to me that could happen, you know, because I love both those things.
And how
the paintings that I'm standing in front of are like other of the paintings in this exhibition, which is very beautiful and very much unlike. I think it's a new step in your work because I find a lot of both biomorphic but mainly constructed forms in your paintings here. But I am particularly interested in the art of collage from a historical point of view, from its beginnings in about 1905 or 1906, and as it developed through artists that were interested in Dada, like Kurt Schwitters, and then later, particularly people like Robert Motherwell and Esteban Vicente, whose use of collage is extremely interesting. I am looking at these collages and would particularly like to know how you make the leap from collage to painting, and do you consider the collaged preparatory studies for these paintings works of art, standalone works of art, or works of art themselves?
I think, by example, I'll just show you one of the collages. And the leap from this constructed collage from advertisement from Art Forum is done very kind of in the historic way of gridding. We make a grid. My assistant, Nick Morgan, makes a grid on my collage, and we number it, and then we grid the larger one. Usually they're a lot larger than this. And then it's a drawing project, basically following where it lays, and the proportions of this become that. And how big that becomes is an interesting part of the art making. For me, right now, this is an interesting painting, but I would imagine it as large as this square. If you could back up and just see this, a square this large, I think would be another kind of work, and that is very interesting to me. I feel like I'm beginning a new body of work. And as a work of art, I think, yes, collages are works of art. To me, this thing has a certain kind of life because of the cuts and the use of it as something to be used. I like that part of it, and I think that makes it very art-like.
Yeah.